In 1821, news reached California that after a hard-fought 10-year war, Mexico had won its independence from Spain.
Liberal ideas about governance and about equality, about opportunity, were very much in the air, in which there were lots of questions about the power of institutions. In that atmosphere, people begin to look at the Catholic Church with a critical eye, thinking, why does this church, why does this institution own so much land?
The government of the Republic of Mexico challenged the power of the Catholic Church. In 1833, it ordered all missions secularized, their land holdings broken up. The vast mission holdings were divided into ranchos and given as land grants to a few hundred families, many of them the original Spanish settlers of California, Californios as they were called.
The Indians were supposed to get the mission lands. That was the plan, was secularization, but it didn't happen. And many of the Indians were lost. Some of them went back to their previous way of life. Others went to work on the ranchos.
And as the Padres faced the end of their dominion, they ensured that some of the mission lands stayed with people they trusted. For her devotion to the missions, Apolinaria, known as the Pious, was given 2 ranchos. She bought a third.
Cuando entraba en posesión de un terreno lo hacía bendecir y le daba nombre de santo. Siempre he tenido mucha fe en el favor de los santos.
By the early 1800s, Americans were moving west, driven by the belief in a God-given right to expand across the continent.
This vision of conquest was tied to visions of liberty and democracy. It was a providential mission. It was a Protestant mission. The problem, however, was that the lands that America wanted to occupy, in their imaginations, they were empty, but in reality, they were not. They were full of indigenous peoples of one sort or another, and in various parts of the country, they were full of Spaniards and their descendants.
Having pushed the native population west, the United States now stretched across Illinois to the frontier and down through Louisiana to the border with Mexico. The first Anglo settlers to cross the border ventured into the Mexican state of Texas, in 1821, invited by the government of Mexico.
Mexico needs to populate the area, so it agrees that anyone can come into Mexico who wants to settle there as long as they're Catholic and they pledge allegiance to the Mexican government.
The Comanches and the Apaches are basically in control. And as a matter of fact, there were several Spanish settlements that were abandoned as the Comanches in particular become more powerful. So the Mexican government wants to create these buffer zones with these Anglo-American colonists.
300 families, most from the American South, were led into Texas by Stephen Austin, a young businessman originally from Virginia.
Men like Stephen Austin are interested in transforming Texas from what they believe to be a wilderness into the next great cotton-growing part of the United States. But they understand that they have to work with Mexican authorities, they have to work with Mexican law, they have to work with Tejano partners in developing Texas.
A lot of the settlers of Texas at this time are coming out of the American South. They're imagining at least part of Texas as being a slaveholding society. They are never without these sentiments of a special superiority that inheres in the Anglo-Saxon race.
Once they start to get critical mass, they're not necessarily ready to accept Mexican government, and they start to find fault with the demands that Mexicans are making of them in order to be accepted in Texas society.
Mexican Texans, Tejanos, were also chafing under the rule of Mexico City, 900 miles away. Prominent among them was Juan Seguin, a third-generation Tejano whose family traced its roots in San Antonio to the earliest settlements in 1712.
Juan Seguin, very early on in the 1830s, already is starting to identify himself as someone else other than a Mexicano, as a Tejano, as a member of an independent republic. He has a conflicted identity. I mean, he calls himself John Seguin.
Seguin's father, Erasmo, San Antonio's postmaster, had personally conducted Stephen Austin across the Texas border in 1821.
Erasmo and Juan Seguin see Anglo-American settlement in Texas as important to the development of this frontier, outlying part of Mexico that isn't able to get the resources from Mexico City to properly develop the region. The Tejanos felt that government, which left decisions in their own hands, was vital to the progress of Texas. And Anglo-Americans who had grown up with the tradition of strong personal rights also wanted a strong local government.
When in 1834, Mexico's new president Antonio Lopez Santa Anna dissolved the Congress to rule all Mexico with an iron hand, Texans and Tejanos united in opposition. In the fall of 1835, they rose in open rebellion. Santa Anna led an army of thousands across the Rio Grande to put down the revolt.
It's funny how I have to remind my students that, you know, they think sometimes that Santa Anna invaded the United States. And I have to disabuse them of that, saying, well, wait a minute, no. Santa Anna was marching into what was still Mexico.
On the 23rd of February, 1836, Santa Anna took possession of the city of San Antonio. 200 Texans fell back to an old Spanish mission called El Alamo. Among them, renowned frontiersman David Crockett of Tennessee, Jim Bowie of Kentucky, and Lieutenant Colonel William Travis of Alabama. There were also Tejanos at El Alamo, men with names like Badillo, Esparza, Navas, and Juan Seguin. Santa Anna laid siege to El Alamo. On the 25th of February, Seguin was sent behind enemy lines to gather reinforcements. At dawn on March 6th, day 13 of the siege, Santa Anna's forces breached the El Alamo defenses. Later that day, Juan Seguin headed back to El Alamo. Seguin listened in vain for the signal gunshot that was to be fired every 15 minutes, as long as the fort held. All the defenders at El Alamo, 189 men, had been killed. Seguin was left to bury their ashes.
Travis, Bowie, Crockett are our brothers, whose valor places them in the rank of my heroes.
To the cry of "Remember the Alamo," Seguin gathered a company of Tejanos and joined General Sam Houston's Army of the Republic of Texas at the Battle of San Jacinto. The Mexican army was taken by surprise. The decisive battle of the Texas Revolution lasted all of 18 minutes. Santa Anna surrendered, handing over Texas to Houston's Army of the Republic of Texas. Juan Seguin was named military commander of West Texas, elected senator of the new republic, and later mayor of San Antonio. But the survivor of El Alamo would soon find himself torn between his allegiance to the Republic of Texas and his loyalty to his own people.
You have an influx of Anglo newcomers, and what they remember is their countrymen being slaughtered by Santana. So reprisals are taken against all Mexicans, including those who fought on the side of the Anglo settlers.
People are being randomly murdered simply for being Mexican. They're being pushed off their land by squatters who are trying to lay claim to these lands.
They're taking cattle, they're taking horses. It's a rough time.
Day and night, my countrymen run to me for protection. Could I leave them defenseless, exposed to the assaults of foreigners who treated them worse than brutes?
These are landowners. These are Mexican elite members coming to Juan Seguin and asking him for protection from the aggressions of these newcomers. Juan Seguin is powerless to do that.
He's trying to uphold the law, and these brigands, if you will, are refusing to abide by the law. In fact, they've threatened him personally. The people who just arrived see the people who have been here for a long time as the outsiders.
A conspiracy was organized to ruin me. Every party of volunteers en route to San Antonio declared that they wanted to kill Juan Seguin.
His Anglo allies will sell him out. They will not protect him when he needed protection. He has to give up the mayoral position in San Antonio.
On the 30th of April, a friend sent me word that a company was coming down the river burning ranchos on their way. Unable any longer to suffer the persecution of ungrateful Americans, I had to leave Texas, abandon all for which I had fought, to become a wanderer.
Juan Seguin fled to Mexico in 1842. In the 20 years since his father led 300 families into Texas, the line that would